It begins with a whisper, a single, haunting confession that no one saw coming. Before Vivian Liberto Cash drew her final breath, she shattered the myth everyone had built around Johnny Cash's man in black persona. What she revealed was not only unexpected, it was devastating, and it changed everything we thought we knew. In the next 11 minutes, you'll hear the story of a love that started on a humble skating rink in San Antonio, Texas, and ended in a heartbreak few ever saw. But this isn't just a tale of romance and betrayal. It's an exposé of how fame reshapes truth, how loyalty can blind us, and how the quietest voice can sometimes deliver the loudest blow. It was July of 1951 when 19-year-old Vivian Liberto first laid eyes on an Air Force private named Johnny Cash. She watched him strap on skates, wobble precariously, and then, without missing a single beat, belt out a tune that echoed through the rink. His voice, she later wrote, felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. By the time the lights dimmed and the final song faded, Vivian knew she'd met someone extraordinary. 3 weeks later, he carved "Johnny Loves Vivian" into a bench, long before his name meant anything beyond that rink. Their courtship flourished through letters, thousands of pages of longing, humor, and declarations of undying devotion. But tucked between loving notes were hints of trouble, drinks too strong, nights unaccounted for, confessions of guilt that Vivian alone understood. Fast forward to 1958. They were living the American dream in a California house once owned by Johnny Carson. The allure of Hollywood shimmered on the horizon, but inside those walls, something darker was brewing. Johnny's singing career exploded. Sun Records signed him alongside the likes of Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis. Suddenly, every woman wanted a piece of the Tennessee too, and every dollar brought Johnny farther from home. He wrote, "I Walk the Line," as a personal vow to Vivian, yet with each #1 hit, that vow felt more like a distant echo than a guarantee. Pills meant to keep him awake or send him to sleep became his companions. Alcohol fueled his nights, paranoia and rage marked his days. And all the while, Vivian was at home, her daughters in tow, watching the man she loved slip through her fingers. Contrast the public adulation with Vivian's hidden pain. Fans cheered every ring of fire, but they never saw the smoke rising from their Casitas Springs estate. They reveled in his outlaw image without knowing the bottle that often dictated his actions. One summer evening, Johnny's fishing trip sparked the Adobe fire, scorching over 500 acres. Locals remembered pulling him from the wreck of his own license, drunk, incoherent, a man half lost in his own fame. Yet in interviews, he remained charming, apologetic even. He was the bad boy everyone adored, and the husband no one truly understood. Then came June Carter, a rising star with a legendary last name and a smile that could silence any room. Vivian sensed the threat from the start, an intuition that turned out to be tragically accurate. While movies retold the Ring of Fire love story with June as star and Johnny as the hopeless romantic, Vivian's truth was more complicated. She discovered invoices of extravagant gifts, whispered comments from bandmates, even secret trips she was never invited to. She watched her husband pursue another woman publicly and privately, convinced everyone their affair was romantic fate rather than betrayal. All the letters, the promises, the public vows, Vivian saw them unravel thread by thread. That by 1966, the weight became unbearable. The bottles and pills, the relentless tours, the hidden dinners, all of it collided in a single moment of clarity. Vivian, who had once followed Johnny's every whim, finally spoke up. She filed for divorce, risking ridicule, shame, and the safety of her 4 daughters. Divorcing a living legend was no small feat, but she did it. She walked away from the spotlight that always shone on Johnny and June, stepping into relative anonymity to rebuild her life. And rebuild she did, volunteering at hospitals, leading garden clubs, hosting friends with her homemade Afghans and pies. She became the heroine of her own story, a far cry from the shadow she'd occupied for so long. Still, the final confession came decades later, in a memoir co-written with and Sharpstein. Vivian poured out the letters, the betrayals, the missed apologies. She revealed that Johnny had never given her the one thing she craved most, an acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. "I would have given anything to hear Johnny say he was sorry," she wrote. That line cut deeper than any scandal, because it was not just about infidelity or fame. It was about the simple human need to be seen and to be loved. And so, here we stand at the end of Vivian's story, a revelation that changed the legend of Johnny Cash forever. She never wanted to tell these secrets, but once she did, our image of the man in black would never be the same. What we're about to uncover is more than gossip. It's a lesson in loyalty, in the cost of fame, and in the strength it takes to speak your truth when the world would rather you stay silent. It started in the heat of a Texas summer, with the boards of a rickety roller rink echoing the first notes of a restless young man's voice. Vivian Liberto watched in awe as Johnny Cash, uniform crisp but skates wobbly, turned every stumble into a serenade. The music drowned out her doubts, weaving into her heart a promise she would carry for the next 3 years. He left for Germany 3 weeks later, and under fluorescent hangers pinned letters so full of longing that each line felt like a caress. Daily dispatches crossed oceans, bearing confessions of love laced with hints of struggle. He described loneliness, the ache of being apart, and an irresistible pull towards something bigger than both of them. And tucked between those lines were notes of shame, nights blurred by whiskey, and regrets he dared not voice in person. Only Vivian recognized those shadows for the menace they would become. The letters charted his metamorphosis from Air Force private to fledgling country singer. He wrote about mastering guitar chords in makeshift dorm rooms and practicing voice inflections until dawn broke. He relished small victories like a successful audition or praise from a music legend, but he also lamented temptations he couldn't resist. Those fleeting mentions of too many drinks or questionable company hinted at a darker hunger. In California, when the reunited couple lived their first days under the same roof, the contrast between ink on paper and reality became impossible to ignore. The man who promised fidelity on line stationery sometimes stumbled through doorways too late to explain. Still, Vivian forgave him, believing that love would heal every wound. She didn't yet understand that sorrow can take root even in soil fertilized by devotion. Be why the Times Sun records put Cash on stage alongside rockabilly icons. Fame had crept into their home like an uninvited guest. Bright lights and chart-topping singles blinded them both to the simple rhythms of everyday life. Vivian watched crowds cheer a version of her husband she barely recognized. In publicity photos, his eyes sparkled with swagger. At home, they sometimes flickered with exhaustion and unease. The couple's Encino mansion became a crossroads of temptation and obligation. Close friends would drop by for a drink or two, and those few minutes longer often stretched into early mornings. Vivian hid her anxiety behind welcoming smiles, offering coffee and pastries while hoping the laughter would mask the tension within. But every spotlight that lifted Johnny higher also cast a deeper shadow across her soul. When pills haphazardly replaced discipline, the man in black slipped further into that abyss. He was both Johnny Cash the legend and Johnny Cash the husband who sometimes forgot to come home. Photographs from the era reveal a confident performer, leaning into the microphone as if it were his confessional pew. Offstage, the same man would pace hotel corridors searching for relief in any bottle or tablet he could find. Vivian tried to anchor him with tenderness, reminding him of promises made on yellowed paper. She prayed each time his silhouette fell into view, fearing what version of Johnny would greet her. The duality gnawed at her, devotion locked in love letters, and terror realized under a shroud of stardom. The summer Johnny ignited 500 acres of Ventura County brush seemed like a metaphor for the years they had lost to addiction and secrecy. While flaming embers destroyed acres, the rage of his unchecked impulses threatened everything they'd built. Locals whispered of a fallen hero reduced to drunken ramblings by a creek bed. Vivian gathered her daughters in the car, driving from rescue point to rescue point, her heart hammering each time they found him alive. She looked at charred trees and ash drifting across the sky and wondered if the man she loved would ever walk that line again. In every crackling flame, she saw the embers of their marriage, once bright and bold, now unpredictable and deadly. Then there was June Carter, a radiant figure with a laugh that could still any room. From the moment she arrived in Johnny's orbit, the dynamic shifted. Vivian's intuition prickled with warning every time June's name fluttered on the wind. Invite as she tried to be, Concern lurked beneath her warmth. Every conversation about June Carter carried the perfume of tension, a silent storm gathering at the edges of every room Johnny and Vivian shared. From the earliest studio sessions to late-night dinners, June's presence was at once comforting and invasive. She was a fellow artist with an infectious warmth, yet there was something predatory beneath the courtesy. Vivian remembered catching June's gaze lingering on Johnny's guitar, like a moth drawn to a flame. When June complimented Johnny's voice or teased him with affectionate laughter, Vivian felt a pang she couldn't quite name. Envy, betrayal, grief rolled into one searing flash. Watching them interact side by side on stage, harmonizing with effortless chemistry, left her stranded in a shadow she didn't know how to escape. Over time, the signs became impossible to ignore. 6 years into their marriage, Vivian uncovered the first trail of breadcrumbs leading to the affair. A stack of florist receipts larger than any friendship would warrant, and signed love notes tucked away in Johnny's coat pocket. Whispers from backing musicians who winked when he entered the room. She combed through hotel registries, piecing together dates that aligned with absent nights she'd spent waiting at home. Every revelation was a shard of glass twisting deeper until she stumbled on the undeniable truth. Yet whenever she confronted him, Johnny smiled with that devilish half-grin and assured her it was nothing more than innocent flirtation. She wanted to believe it, yearned for the old Johnny who scribbled poetry in her palms. But those weeks of denial exhausted her, draining the last reserves of her hope. The world around them stoked the fire. Fans clamored for the postcard image, Johnny and June, two hearts bound by music. Magazine spreads immortalized their laughter as if it were destiny incarnate. Vivian watched from the sidelines as Hollywood spun her life story into a fairy tale she no longer recognized. She was vilified in paparazzi captions as a bitter ex or a forgotten footnote, while June basked in the limelight. Each headline cut deeper than any personal betrayal. It wasn't just about losing her husband, it was about losing control over her own narrative. She saw her identity slip away in pixelated photos of two happy singers, her face blurred and gone. Still, inside her chest beat the heart of a fighter. Late one night in their Californian home, she gathered the courage to speak her truth. Standing in a kitchen drenched in moonlight, she held up photographs, flight receipts, and scribbled lyrics that he had begun dedicating to another. Her voice shook but held firm, a tremor that carried the weight of years. In that moment, she stopped playing the role scripted for her. She demanded honesty, a reckoning that could not be placated by another love song. Johnny looked at her, eyes wide with guilt, and somewhere beyond the fame and fanfare, a man she once adored returned for an instant. But that moment passed like a dying ember, giving way again to the star whose magnetism intoxicated everyone but her. When she left him, the press leaped at the story. Johnny Cash dumps first wife for country star, blared headlines designed to humiliate. Letters of sympathy poured in for Vivian, but they were laced with pity. She could feel her dignity slipping through creasing tears and forced smiles at award shows. In her solitude, she uncovered a fierce resilience. She channeled betrayal into reinvention, enrolling in community workshops, forging friendships beyond the music world. She learned the art of rebirth, caring for her daughters in an environment where their mother no longer carried the shadow of Johnny's fame. Her life became a new melody composed of quiet strength and uncompromising self-respect. Even so, the music clung to her, like a ghost that refused to drift away. Years later, when she finally agreed to open the vault of her own memories, she did so not to scandalize, but to reclaim her voice. The pages of her memoir lay bare every wound, every misstep, and every ounce of undying love that preceded the fractures. In those words, she reframed their story not as a mere footnote to Johnny and June's epic romance, but as a powerful anthem of truth against the siren call of celebrity. And when the final page turned, she emerged not as the jilted wife she once was, but as a woman who stood at the crossroads of greatness and loss, and chose herself. Her memoir arrived on bookshelves like a bombshell wrapped in velvet, soft to the touch, but impossible to ignore. Readers flipped through page after page as Vivian Liberto's gentle, unwavering voice guided them down memory lanes no one else had dared walk. Where magazine exposes had skimmed the surface, she dove deep into the currents beneath the spotlight. The echo of her husband's boots on hollow hallways, the flavors of cold coffee spilled in panic, the hush of a child's question about a missing father she struggled to answer. She wrote not to sensationalize, but to illuminate, to show the human cost of adulation, the price paid by the partner behind every roaring crowd. The memoir's release was met with mixed reactions. Devoted Cash fans saw it as heresy, a calculated attack on a man whose songs had defined their own lives. Country purists bristled at the unvarnished accounts of substance abuse and marital strain, preferring the sanitized legend of a blue-jean troubadour with an unwavering heart. Others, those who longed for nuance, heralded Vivian as a fearless chronicler, praising her courage for stepping out of anonymity to share her truth. Bookstores displayed her tome beside glossy retrospectives of Johnny's career, creating a stark juxtaposition. Two narratives sharing the same names on their covers, yet reflecting worlds apart. Within weeks, discussions ignited across living rooms and online forums. One reviewer noted how Vivian's description of the Andalusian ardor she witnessed in Johnny's early letters reframed "I walk the line" as both a promise and a plea, a line he would inevitably cross and then fight desperately to redraw. Another praised her acute memory for small details. The threadbare towel Johnny used to mop his brow after grueling performances, the peeling wallpaper in their first rented apartment, the scent of lavender oil she applied to soothe her children's nightmares when Johnny's rage flared again. Small observances that, when woven together, created a tapestry of intimacy more vivid than any stage production. But it was Vivian's posthumous confession that triggered the real shockwaves. The admission that the heartbreak she endured was not born solely of infidelity or addiction, but of abandonment by public memory itself. She revealed how, long before her manuscripts lay open for all to read, she sat through Johnny's greatest honors, Grammy Awards, televised specials, sold-out tours, feeling as though an invisible barrier had erected between her world and his. Every accolade he received felt like a brick in a wall that kept her forever on the outside. It was not only her husband's voice that had walked away. It was her significance in his story, erased by a combination of fame and mythology. Vivian didn't stage this reveal for attention. She orchestrated it as a requiem for her younger self. She wrote of evenings spent in quiet reflection, journal in hand, crafting the very words that would carry her legacy forward. She spoke of phone calls from strangers, fans who thanked her for giving them permission to question the official narrative, and letters from music historians who vowed to rewrite textbooks. Suddenly, the forgotten wife was the one rewriting history, and her candor became the new anthem for authenticity in celebrity culture. Yet the weight of that act was not lost on her. Late into the nights leading up to publication, Vivian wrestled with guilt over exposing the private vulnerabilities of children who had long since grown into adults with their own lives. She paused at times, hand hovering over the paragraph that named the hospital where Johnny's final years were haunted by pain and obscured by scandal. She agonized over whether to omit the anecdote of their last phone call, an exchange so raw that the final line of her manuscript simply reads, "I wanted him to tell me he'd forgive me." In the end, she chose truth over protection, believing that the rawest wounds demanded to be shown in order to heal. The aftermath was a tipping point in how society viewed the entanglement of personal stories and public personas. Documentaries that had once lionized Johnny began to interview Vivian's daughters, adding new layers to the narrative. Radio segments dedicated airtime to readings from her memoir, overlaying her words with John's original letter recordings. Even major country music institutions reissued compilations under the tagline "Rediscovered Stories, Johnny and Vivian," forcing a collective reassessment of an icon's legend through the prism of human frailty. As for the legacy of the Man in Black, it shifted gradually but indelibly. Songs once celebrated for their raw toughness now resonated with nuanced interpretations of loyalty and loss. Scholars cited Vivian's memoir in analyses of Johnny's lyrical evolution, arguing that his later compositions carried echoes of regret rooted in the marriage's collapse. Audiences, too, changed their allegiance. They began to see Johnny not just as an outlaw hero on stage, but as a man torn between devotion and self-destruction, whose greatest love story remained unpublished for decades. Through it all, Vivian's own narrative arc achieved completion years before her passing, long before the memoir found its way into bookstores and hearts worldwide. She reunited with friends at community centers, hosted charity events raising funds for children affected by parental addiction, and reveled in the simple freedom of being known for her own merits. Where once she had lived in the wings of a legend, she now stood center stage in her own right, a figure of admiration for her resilience and her unwavering commitment to truth. And so, as the chapters of her life draw to a close, we find ourselves at the threshold of a new understanding. Vivian Liberto Cash may have been the woman behind the legend, but her final, fearless words ensured that she would be remembered as a legend in her own terms. In the grand tapestry of country music history, the lines between myth and reality have been redrawn, sharpened by her honesty, colored by her strength, and lit by the courage it takes to speak out when the world expects you to stay silent. And yet, decades have slipped by since Vivian Liberto's final words echoed through that manuscript, words that tore down the polished facade of a legend and laid bare the human cost beneath legendary status. Imagine a young woman stepping into the glaring stage lights alongside her Air Force sweetheart, unaware that her love story would be subsumed by a narrative written by the world around them. Contrast that hopeful girl with the woman who, many years later, mustered the courage to hold up every shard of her shattered heart for public scrutiny. It is in that dramatic juxtaposition, innocence meeting hard-won wisdom, that the true power of Vivian's confession resides. Today, when documentaries revisit Johnny Cash's storied career, they can no longer bypass Vivian's testimony. Historians and filmmakers incorporate her letters, her diary entries, her co-authored manuscript, and sometimes even her voice in recorded interviews to enrich the fabric of the Man in Black's legend. No longer is he simply the outlaw hero who sang of trains, prison cells, and redemption. He is also the man who left his first wife home alone in a mansion that felt like a gilded cage, chasing the thrill of the stage while his family waited in silent halls. This deeper narrative resonates because it mirrors our own struggles between public ambition and private fidelity, between the glamour of applause and the ache of abandonment. At its core, Vivian's story is not merely a celebrity expose. It is a universal tale of sacrifice, the sacrifices demanded by greatness and the sacrifices demanded by love. She sacrificed anonymity for notoriety in telling her truth. She sacrificed emotional comfort for the chance to reclaim her own identity. And in doing so, she opened the floodgates for conversations about mental health, substance abuse, and the unspoken burdens that partners of stars carry in silence. Even now, forums buzz with comments from viewers who see themselves in Vivian's plight. The spouse whose achievements are eclipsed, the parent whose children grow up in a world that only recognizes one half of the family portrait. Contrast, again, frames the wonder of her legacy. When Johnny Cash performed his final concerts, crowds roared for an icon at the peak of vulnerability, his battles with pain and medication on full display in every worn chord. Yet it was Vivian's calm, measured prose that captured a broader emotional truth, that fame can lift you higher than you ever dreamed, then hurl you into depths you could never anticipate. In Johnny's music, we find defiant optimism. In Vivian's narrative, we find humble resilience. Those two voices, separated by history but united in heartache, create a dialogue that continues to reverberate through country music and beyond. As we reflect on Vivian's final revelations, consider what it means to speak your truth when the world expects you to stay silent. What price are you willing to pay to reclaim your narrative? Vivian paid dearly, her privacy fractured, her grief publicized, her daughter's childhood exposed to relentless scrutiny. But she reclaimed something priceless, agency over her own story. In a culture that often deifies its icons, Fabian's script reminds us that legends are human and that acknowledging their flaws does not diminish their achievements. Rather, it enhances our empathy and deepens our appreciation for the art that emerges from struggle. Now, as you sit on the edge of your seat, remember that this is not the end of the story. It is a turning point. Vivian's memoir set the stage for a new wave of truth-telling in celebrity circles. It inspired future revealing biographies and documentaries that place partners, siblings, and insiders at the forefront of historical accounts. It propelled fans to question the shiny surfaces of fame and to value the quieter, often overlooked voices that shape the world behind the curtain. So what comes next? In upcoming videos, we will dive into the hidden archives of other musical icons, unearthing letters, journals, and recordings that have stayed buried for decades. We'll explore untold stories, wives who never spoke up, bandmates whose contributions were erased, managers whose memoirs were suppressed. Each tale will carry the same emotional gravity that Vivian's story holds: the tension between love and abandonment, the seductive lure of the spotlight, and the yearning for recognition that binds humanity across eras. But before we move forward, let's pause to honor one lesson that rings louder than any chord. Silence is an amplifier of pain. When voices go unheard, myths grow unchecked, and legends become one-dimensional. Vivian's bravery in breaking her silence reminds us that speaking out, even at great cost, is the clearest path to truth. It is how we heal, how we humanize history, and how we pay tribute to those whose stories deserve to be told in full. If you found yourself captivated by Vivian's journey, from a teenage love so pure it carved words into a bench, to a fractured marriage that made headlines, to a final confession that reshaped a legend, then you're ready for what lies ahead. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of truth. Subscribe and ring the bell to join us on this exploration of untold histories. Share your thoughts below. Whose story should we uncover next? Because behind every spotlight, there are stories waiting to be heard, voices waiting to break the silence. As we draw the final curtain on Vivian's tale, it's clear that her voice still echoes through every chord Johnny ever sang. She showed us that behind every swaggering verse lies a heart that yearns for understanding, a soul that aches for acknowledgement. Her narrative forces us to reckon with the reality that even the greatest legends carry hidden scars, and those scars deserve to be honored rather than hushed. When fame hands you a spotlight, it also hands you a choice: to step into the glare or to let the glow blind you to the needs of others. Vivian chose the latter, until, years later, she chose herself. Imagine standing alone on a stage built by someone else's dreams, holding a script you didn't write, reciting lines that never quite fit. That's the precarious position Vivian found herself in when Johnny's career eclipsed hers, when the world's fascination with his persona left her playing a role she no longer recognized. But in reclaiming her narrative, she tore up the old script and penned a new one where she wasn't a footnote in a Man in Black story, but the author of a memoir as compelling as any live performance. She taught us that authenticity demands courage, and that the darkest backstage corridors can be navigated when you carry the light of your own truth. If there's one takeaway from Vivian's courageous revelation, it's this: silence is a story with no hero. By breaking her silence, she became the protagonist in her own life, a testament to resilience. Her words invite each of us to question the narratives we passively consume. Whose voices are foreground, and whose are relegated to the wings? What truths have been sacrificed on the altar of myth? What stories remain untold because they don't fit the tidy arcs we've come to expect? In answering those questions, we continue the legacy Vivian began, a legacy built on listening to the voices we've been conditioned to ignore. Looking forward, our exploration of hidden histories will gather momentum. In the coming episodes, we will dive into the diaries of a drummer who never got credit, the unpublished letters of a bandmate forced into obscurity, and the confessions of managers whose names never made album liner notes. Each installment will carry the same spirit of contrast and revelation that defined Vivian's journey. The collision of public triumph and private turmoil, the collision of devotion and disillusionment, the collision of silence and exposure. We'll traverse decades of suppressed narratives and shine a light on the human cost behind the music we love. But beyond the sparkling anecdotes and scandalous reveals lies a deeper purpose. These stories remind us that history is not a monolith. It's a mosaic of individual experiences. Each piece matters, whether it gleams in the spotlight or lies in shadow. We owe it to the invisible architects of our cultural heritage to lift them into view, to give them their rightful place in the story. In doing so, we enrich our understanding of the icons we celebrate and the art they created. We discover that every melody carries more than a tune. It carries the imprint of lives that intersected, collided, and sometimes shattered. So here's our challenge. Together, support the voices that have been muffled by circumstance, amplify the narratives that have been pushed aside, and never settle for a single storyline when dozens of intricate threads await discovery. If Vivian's story taught us anything, it's that the true measure of greatness lies not only in what we achieve on stage, but in how we honor the silence that surrounds us. It lies in the empathy we extend to those whose applause never quite reached them. It lies in the commitment to unearth every voice that shaped the music, the art, and the legacy as you prepare for our next deep dive. Take a moment to consider which untold story calls to you. Is it the girlfriend who wrote love letters that became public property? The sideman whose riffs became hits, but whose name never trended? The producer who held the console, but never held the mic? Share your suggestions below, and we'll chart our course together. Because the adventure of discovery belongs to all of us, and the power to rewrite history is strongest when we wield it in unison. Vivian Liberto Cash may have passed away, but her truth lives on, etched into every page she penned and every psyche she touched. Her final confession did more than shatter a legend. It rebuilt the narrative of an era, adding depth to a story we thought we knew. As we honor her courage, let's carry forward her mission. To speak up when silence demands too high a price, to champion the quiet voices behind the curtain, and to remember that legends are only as enduring as the truths they're built upon. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and keep uncovering the stories that breathe humanity back into history.